The years after the First World War were messy, to say the least, in Central and Eastern Europe. As old empires crumbled and new states emerged, there were wars, there were civil wars, wars of independence, and one of the overlooked conflicts was the Polish-Lithuanian War that occurred from May 1919 till November 1920. What was that conflict all about? Well, I'm here on a Polish war cemetery where Polish soldiers that fell during this conflict lie buried. This here is a story about the Polish-Lithuanian War. Keep watching. In 1915, the German forces, they occupied Vilnius. As part of their strategy, Germany permitted the Vilnius Conference to take place, hoping it would declare Lithuania's desire to break away from Russia and form closer ties with Germany. In September 1917, the conference established a 20-person council that had to negotiate Lithuania's independence with the Germans. In the main resolution of the conference, the Lithuanians defined the outlines of their planned future state, an independent, democratically organized state within ethnographic boundaries, with the correctives essential for economic life, the final structure of which would have to be specified by a founding Seimas of Lithuania convened in Vilnius, democratically elected by all the people of Lithuania, and the cultural rights of ethnic minorities would be guaranteed. As a result, on the 16th of February 1918, the council issued the Act of Independence of Lithuania. The so-called Kingdom of Lithuania was born. Now, the plan was that a German monarch was to be on the Lithuanian throne. He never stepped foot inside the country as events overtook him. On the 11th of November 1918, the armistice was signed, and that meant that the Germans had to withdraw from Lithuania. The Germans had to evacuate their conquered eastern territories. And on the 1st of January 1919, the Germans handed over Vilnius to the Poles. But the Poles soon evacuated the city as well, because of the advancing Red Army, which captured the city on the 5th to the 6th of January. And the Reds, they made Vilnius the capital of the Lithuanian Socialist Soviet Republic. From March 1919, Vilnius was the capital of the Lit-Bel Republic, in which Lithuania and Belarus were combined. Then, on April 19th, the Poles took the city, and more than a year later, mid-July 1920, the Reds took the city. To the Lithuanians, Vilna was the symbol of the glories of the Grand Duchy. Lithuanian leaders insisted that they were re-establishing Lithuania, and they were determined to make Vilna their capital. The Poles, on the other hand, rejected a purely national characterization of the old Lithuanian state. They insisted that because of the long union between Poland and Lithuania, the latter had accepted Polish culture. Vilna, they declared, was clearly a Polish city. What made the situation even more confusing was a pre-war Russian census, in which the statistics showed that the majority of the population in the Vilnius area was made up of Belarusians. Now, this old Russian census from 1897 was criticized by all parties as being inaccurate. Jews 40.3%, Poles 30.1%, and the Lithuanians only 2.1%. In the province as a whole, Jews 12.6%, Poles 8.2%, and the Lithuanians 17.6%. Now, do notice that Western observers in the early 1920s saw that many local people simply referred to themselves as locals. The conflict for Vilnius stood at the center of the clash between the Poles and the Lithuanians. Between early 1919 and late 1920, the city switched hands between Poles, Bolsheviks and Lithuanians 7 times. The first clashes between Lithuanians and Polish troops occurred near Vivis, central Lithuania, in May 1919 and lasted until November 29, 1920, when in Kaunas both sides agreed to stop fighting. Yet there was no official peace signed because there was never an official war declared, and clashes between Polish and Lithuanian militias occurred till 1923. And from 1920, the conflict would become part of the broader Polish-Soviet War. Lithuania had declared itself neutral regarding this war, but took advantage of the situation. As the Poles evacuated Vilnius, they took the city and its surroundings. Yet from August 1920, the tide of war changed, and it were now the Poles who were on the offensive. They chased away the Red Army and fought against Lithuanian units that stood in their way. And this ended for the Lithuanians with the loss of Vilnius and the Suwalki region. The war greatly deepened the nationalization and militarization of Lithuanian society. Now, early May 1919, the Bolsheviks were pushed out of eastern Lithuania, and there were no hostilities between Poles and Lithuanians yet. Initially, they cooperated with each other, and shortly after, a demarcation line was negotiated, yet unsuccessfully, but peace remained. But slowly but surely, this peace transformed into hostility. Until September, we lived with Poles quite passively, like a dog with a cat. Later, the tensions grew, because the Polish commandant, Captain Dwozak, turned the locals against us, so that they would expel us from Žyrintas. And these tensions resulted into troop buildup on both sides. See, until August, the Germans were still stationed in the region, and they were a stabilizing factor. But things escalated once the Germans left the area. On the 19th of September, the Polish troops attacked the Lithuanians near Žyrintas and captured 30 of them. Violence was triggered by the inability of both sides to decide which of them should control the monopoly on violence in the vicinity. In 1919, most of the fighting did not concern Vilnius, but the ethnically mixed Suwalki region. Now, the fighting subsided initially after the arrival of British military representatives in the region. A demarcation line was agreed upon, yet Polish paramilitaries continued to cross this line. Mid-October, they attacked a town in southern Lithuania, but they were repelled. The Allies then tried to deal with the issue of Poland's eastern borders by imposing the so-called Curzon Line on December 8, 1919. The whole Suwalki region was for the Poles, yet Vilnius and Grodno were for the Lithuanians. Polish leader Piłsudski was angry. He viewed this as an attempt to tame his ambitions of creating a federal Poland that would include parts of Lithuania and Belarus. Around the same time, the head of the political division of the Polish army wrote a report in which was written that the Lithuanian government treated the Poles in their territory with disdain. Yet also the conduct of the Polish troops was criticized. It was said that the Poles behaved as conquerors in the regions that were dominated by Lithuanians and Belarusians. Requisitions, assaults, and robberies often occurred. When the Polish-Soviet War was going on at the same time, it escalated in April 1920. So did the situation on the fragile Lithuanian-Polish border. The Poles and Ukrainians, led by Simon Petliura, had made an agreement and advanced against the Bolsheviks. The commander of the Lithuanian army, General Liatukas, feared the Poles would attack Kaunas. He had only 27,000 troops that were spread out along the demarcation line, and morale was poor. But he was mistaken, because the Poles did not attack him. No, they advanced towards the east, and they captured Kiev. Meanwhile, the Reds were making separate peace deals with the Baltic nations, with Estonia, for example, in February 1920, and with Latvia on August 11th. And this forestalled a Polish attempt to form a broader anti-Bolshevik Finnish, Estonian, Latvian, Polish front. On the 12th of July 1920, the Lithuanian-Soviet Treaty was signed, in which the Soviets acknowledged Vilnius as part of Lithuania. In the meanwhile, the Poles wanted support from the Allies to fight the Reds, but this was conditional, because the Poles had to give up the Vilnius region and respect the Curzon Line. The Lithuanians then moved on Vilnius on the 15th of July, but found the city occupied by the Reds. The majority of Vilnius' population, Poles and Jews, watched with curiosity how recent enemies, Bolshevik and Lithuanian soldiers, marched next to each other. On the streets, the Soviets did not resist the Lithuanians, but they openly plundered the apartment of the Polish bourgeoisie and also helped themselves with the stockpiles of military provisions left by the Polish army. The train station soon filled up with echelons full of war bounty bound for Russia. Now, to avoid escalation between Lithuanian and Bolshevik troops, the Lithuanian commanders, they pulled away from Vilnius. The Lithuanians then marched into the Suwalki region and captured 3,600 Polish troops. They also wanted to march for Grodno, but the Reds had already took the city. The Reds were advancing on Warsaw, but change came with the miracle on the Vistula. mid-August 1920, when the overstretched Red Army troops were counterattacked by a revitalized Polish army near Warsaw. As the Polish broke through the Bolshevik front, the Red Army started pulling back from central Poland. Now the Poles regained the initiative, and they demanded passage through Lithuanian territory. The Lithuanian government rejected this, but soon Polish troops were marching through the Suwałki area. As the Poles captured town after town, the Bolsheviks evacuated Vilnius on the 27th of August and quickly handed over the city to the Lithuanians. Polish military leader Piłsudski tried to negotiate with the Lithuanian government till early September and put pressure on the League of Nations, but to no avail. Clashes kept occurring as the Lithuanians, on their turn, took more and more of the Suwałki area. From the perspective of the Polish government, Lithuania was not a neutral side, because its forces protected the right flank of the Red Army based in Grodno and also occupied the territories which had been accorded to Poland by the Curzon Line, including Sejny and Punsk. Meanwhile, the Lithuanians argued they were defending their ethnic minorities, accorded to them by their peace treaty with Soviet Russia. Late September 1920, the Poles, they crushed through the Lithuanian lines. They then turned their main thrust against the Bolsheviks in Grodno and took it on September 27th. Lithuanian MP Mykolas Šleževičius called for the mobilization of the entire society. We all have to take guns and march to the front. Members of the parliament, soldiers, officials, farmers and workers. A patriotic campaign called for the fight against the Polish landlords that want to enslave us and take our land. Now the League of Nations urged both sides to stop and respect the proposed Curzon Line. The fighting subsided on the 7th of October 1920, in which a new demarcation line was established with a treaty signed in the Suwałki area. What it basically came down to was that the Poles were to be taken control of this area, but Vilnius and its surroundings was to be for the Lithuanians. On the 12th of October 1920, the Poles and the Reds signed a peace treaty in Riga, which ended hostilities between them. The final Riga peace settlement between Poland and Soviet Russia was signed only on March 18, 1921. The Riga Treaty ensured that the Curzon Line was now dead. The eastern border of Poland had been moved about 250 kilometers east of it. With the Soviets out of the way, Piłsudski knew the Red Army would not intervene, as he would take on Lithuania. Also, in the agreement with the Soviets, it was stated that the Lithuanians and the Poles had to sort out their own differences. But he could not just march into the Vilnius area and get away with it without the protests of the Allies, so he came up with a cunning plan. A staged mutiny. Polish General Lucien Lidygowski, with a force of volunteers recruited from the Polish-Belarusian-Lithuanian borderland, had to do the job. On October 6, 1920, Lidygowski's force, about 14,000 strong, started to move towards Vilnius. The Lithuanian troops they encountered were easily brushed aside. Now, many Jews of the city, they fled from the city out of fear of a pogrom that occurred 1 year earlier. And the British and French representatives that were located in the city protested against the presence of Polish troops. They were dismissed and ordered out of the city. On the 12th of October, Lidygowski declared himself the leader of Central Lithuania, in reality a Polish puppet state. As a result, nationalist sentiments reached a climax in Kaunas, Lithuania, and many volunteers came forward that were willing to fight against the Poles and drive them out of Vilnius. The Poles, however, managed to keep their hands on the city, and eventually an armistice was signed and a buffer zone was established that had to make sure both parties would not clash with each other again. But this had the opposite effect. The neutral zone became some kind of lawless no man's land, where Polish and Lithuanian paramilitaries often clashed. Lithuanian villagers complained about Polish attacks. Here is one testimony. Our citizen, Motiejus L., was taken from his house, beaten until he bled. His whole left cheek was ripped out and they poked his eye. They were beating all, including women and children. Children were interrogated about where goods were hidden by twisting their fingers. Vladis S. was beaten for half an hour. A gun was forced into his mouth and he was told, "You better should not be Lithuanians, for when we come the second time, we will burn everything. This dirty war continued till May 1923, when the neutral zone was dissolved and regular army units moved into the zone, which had a monopoly on violence. How many Poles and Lithuanians died during this undeclared Polish-Lithuanian War is hard to say. I read about 450 deaths on the Lithuanian side and 250 on the Polish side. Thanks to my patrons, you see their names on the screen, and a special thanks to Rainy Bechtel, Thomas Sapiega, Damian Wallace, Connor, Marcus Kaas, Nick Terranova, Mark Littlehill, Justin Trebell, Tanya Dixie, Susanna Di Bella, Fabrizio, Robert Meehan, David H. Ovett, Wayback History, Michael Prusi, Daniel Holland and Marcus Fielding. Vilnius was for Poland, but it would not remain under Polish control, because in 1939 the Nazis and Soviets decided to carve up the Second Polish Republic, and thus Vilnius came into Lithuanian hands, because Lithuania itself would be annexed by the Soviet Union. More anti-Jewish violence would occur when the Nazis launched Operation Barbarossa and conquered the region all together. If you want to learn about Lithuanian collaboration during World War II, you can click here. And I made a video, an overview video, about the messy post-World War I period in Central and Eastern Europe. Click here. Thanks for watching. See you later.